our topic is going to be the Lake Normandale Water Quality Improvement Project. You've probably seen Lake Normandale has been drained lately. Well, it was drained, then it filled back up again when it rained, and now it's being drained again. Today, our guest speaker is Erica Sniegowski, Program and Project Manager at the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, who's going to discuss the project's background, goals, steps, and progress today. And she serves as the Program and Project Manager for the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District. Erica has over 10 years of experience in water resources education and management, and she received her master's degree from the University of Minnesota in water resources science and her bachelor's degree in biology from Iowa State University. Also found out today, as we were sitting talking, Erica is actually the daughter of Spencer Schramm. And for those of you who are longtime members of Bloomington Rotary, a former member of Bloomington Rotary. So Pete is working on her to join our club. So before I call Erica up here, wanted to show you what's been lurking in the depths of Lake Normandale. Here's what they found.
Geez, Normandale Lake is so gross. It's all the algae.
I know, and that smell, ugh, it's the curly leaf pondweed. How embarrassing.
It's just so hard, you know. None of the other plants like me. I know I have growth issues. I take over every space that I'm in. But it just seems like everyone's out to get me.
We sure are. The city of Bloomington
and the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District are working together to improve Normandale Lake
and get rid of curly leaf pondweed.
We're going to drain all the water out of Normandale Lake, let the invasive plants freeze,
and the creek will fill it back up, and it'll look
and smell better.
So pack your bags, pondweed.
You're out of here.
So please welcome the former Erica Schramm, now Erica Sniegowski.
While we're switching presentations, I'm also going to introduce Steve Gurney. He's here with the city of Bloomington in the back. He's a water resources specialist, and he's the project manager on behalf of the city of Bloomington. And I will be giving the presentation, and then I'm going to bring Steve up in case you have some really difficult engineering questions, and he'll help answer those. I want to thank you for inviting me to present today. I grew up in Bloomington and I currently live in Bloomington, so it really is an honor to be here to be able to talk to you about this project. So first I want to talk to you a little bit about the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, because I'm sure there's probably a few of you in here that aren't familiar with our organization. So the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District is a local unit of government. It's funded through property tax levy. We manage the water resources and land within a 50 square mile area of land. So how we work is all the water that drains into 9 Mile Creek is the area of land that we manage. And our mission is to protect and improve the water resources within that area of land. And so we work with 6 different cities, and Bloomington is one of those cities. So not only do we do projects like the Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project, but we also do water quality monitoring. We do a lot of education. So we work with volunteers, we do workshops, we work with professionals. So we work with plow drivers in the city of Bloomington to make sure that they're properly applying the right amount of salt to the streets. And we give out grants as well. So we want homeowners to be responsible and take charge of their stormwater and put in best management practices like rain gardens. So we do a lot of different work within our watershed district with a small staff. We have 3 staff members at our office. So what's going on with Normandale Lake? By now, I hope you've heard something about what's going on, because education and outreach have been a large part of this project. We didn't want to drain a lake and have people shocked by that. And so hopefully you've heard a little bit about what's going on. Before we get to the actual drawdown, I'm going to go through some background on the lake and the actual project. And I get really excited about talking about this project and science. And so if you have questions along the way, please just ask them. So Normandale Lake, if you've been around in Bloomington and been around here for a while, you might know that Normandale Lake didn't exist. It hasn't existed forever. It was actually a joint project between the city of Bloomington and the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, and it was created in the late 1970s for flood control. So it provides significant protection for downstream properties in Bloomington. It's about 116 acres in size, and it's really shallow. The average depth is only 3 feet deep. So what's the problem with the lake? Well, if you've walked around it anytime recently, you've probably seen some of the problems. But the science behind it is it receives a lot of phosphorus from the upstream watershed. I don't know if you noticed, but 9 Mile Creek actually flows through the lake, and that brings nutrients from upstream. 2/3 of our watershed flows into Normandale Lake, and that brings a lot of pollution into the lake. And it also has internal sources of phosphorus. So that means that phosphorus is being released from the lake bottom. And this feeds algae. That's what algae needs to grow, is phosphorus. And so that's that green gunky stuff that nobody likes to see in the lake. There's also a lot of aquatic plants growing in the lake and a lot of attached algae on those aquatic plants. And the other problem that we noticed is there's low oxygen levels in the lake as well. So Normandale Lake is not the healthiest lake in our watershed. We've also gotten a lot of citizen feedback from residents in Bloomington. They have also noted that there's too much phosphorus coming into the lake, too much algae, that there's limited recreational opportunities at the lake, that when you're walking around it in the summer, it can have a bad smell, and that they wanted action and implementation of long-term solutions. So these are the things that we are clearly hearing from the people of Bloomington. And so what do we need to do? Well, there's 3 things that we came up with that we needed to do. The first step was a lake drawdown, followed by an herbicide treatment and an alum treatment. And I'll walk through what all these 3 things mean. But again, how did we get to that? Well, it's been a long process, and typically our projects don't take this long to get to where we're actually implementing action, but there was some reasons for why this project took so long. And it started back in 2005 when the district did what's called a use attainability analysis. That's a really fancy word, but what it really is, it's a study where we look at what's wrong with the lake, or why isn't a water body healthy, and what do we need to do to fix it. And then in 2007, we received a petition from the city of Bloomington. They said, hey, Watershed District, we want you to do a project to make Normandale Lake healthier. But in the meantime, we did more water quality monitoring in the lake, and we noticed that water quality trends were actually getting better. So the lake was actually getting healthier. And so we said, for the time being, things are looking better. We're not going to do a project right now. And the other thing with Normandale Lake is that the Army Corps of Engineers holds a permit over the lake. And that's because, again, it's a constructed lake. And so we had to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to find allowable lake management options. And that took a bit of time. And so between 2007 and 2016, it's not that we were ignoring what was going on in Normandale Lake. There was just a lot of background work that people weren't necessarily seeing. So we continued to work with the Army Corps of Engineers. We continued to do lake monitoring and review what that lake monitoring was showing. And then in 2017, we did some very detailed monitoring to understand what was going on in the lake. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of aquatic plants in the lake, and so we really needed to understand what those plants were doing and how that would affect any management options that we were going to look at. And then in 2018, we did an engineer's report, and what that is, it's a feasibility study to look at management options, and we got some preliminary designs. And in 2018, we also did a voluntary environmental assessment worksheet because we wanted to make sure that any management options we chose wouldn't have negative environmental consequences. And so that got us to our drawdown. So what is a drawdown? It's what you've probably been seeing out at the lake. It's where you drain the water out of a lake. How do you do that? That's a question that I've been getting. Well, there's a few different options. What we started with is using pumps to pump the water out of the lake and into the creek channel. And as I said, Normandale Lake's a man-made lake, and so when it was created, we actually put in a bypass pipe with the intent that we might want to drain the water out of the lake in the future. The thing that we didn't know at the time was the size of the pipe that we put in, which was 18 inches, wasn't big enough to actually get all the water out effectively. We have too much creek water coming in to actually lower the water levels fast enough in the lake. So we started in August using pumps and opening up this 18-inch pipe that we have in the lake with the intent of putting in a larger pipe, a 36-inch pipe that does have the capacity to actually drain the water down out of the lake. So we started that in this August. And the plan is to drain the water out of the lake, and then we want the lake to be empty over the winter, and then in March we'll close the pipe up and the lake will refill by April. And people have asked, how will the lake refill? Luckily we have this nice creek flowing into the lake, and all our models show that we can get the lake filled up in as little as 3 weeks. So that's the one part of this project that we have no concerns about. We will be able to refill the lake. The other piece of this is the picture is showing the open water before the drawdown and open water after the drawdown. Because 9 Mile Creek comes into the lake, we know that we won't be able to get a complete drawdown. There's just too much flow coming into the lake that we know we'll always have a little bit of open water even as we're getting it out of the lake. So why a drawdown? We haven't answered that question yet, except you got a hint of it from the video that we showed at the beginning. Well, when you draw down a lake, you consolidate the sediment in the bed of the lake, and that can help reduce phosphorus being released from that sediment. But the main goal is to kill the curly-leaf pondweed, that invasive non-native plant. Curly-leaf pondweed is very, very hard to kill. One of the best ways to do it is to drain a lake and freeze the sediment. So it has these reproductive structures called turions, and they lay in the sediment bed, and really the only effective way to kill them is to freeze them, but you have to have the water out of the lake to do that. So why is curly-leaf pondweed so bad? Well, it's an invasive plant and it displaces our native plants in the lake. And it has this really odd growing cycle, and that it starts actually growing under the ice. And so it outcompetes our native plants in that way, because our native plants don't start growing until ice is actually off the lake. And then it dies in the middle of the summer, which our native plants don't die until later in the season. And so when it dies in the middle of the summer, it releases this pulse of phosphorus. And if you remember, phosphorus is what makes algae grow. So then we can get these really nasty algae blooms in the middle of summer. So it's a nasty plant, and we want to get rid of it as much as possible in Normandale Lake. And so that's why we're going to draw down the lake, or we are drawing down the lake. So there's some considerations when you're emptying a lake. We needed to think about timing and anticipating lake level fluctuations. So I know there's been some comments about the lake filling up again, and you know, what were we thinking? But we did anticipate that it would rain this fall and that lake levels would bounce back up and up again if it rained. So the big question is, when do we need to start the drawdown in order for it to be successful? And so we work with Bar Engineering Company, and so they did a whole bunch of number crunching, and they looked at different scenarios of using pumps, of using pipes, and what did we need to do. And so we figured out that we needed to start the drawdown mid-August in order to have the lake successfully drawn down by the winter. But we had another impact that we needed to consider, and that's the turtles. We know we have turtles living in Normandale Lake, and in working with the Department of Natural Resources, they gave us a deadline of September 15th of when the lake needed to be substantially drawn down so that turtles would have time to find new overwintering habitat. And so that also plays into this chart of when we had to start pumping in order to get the lake drawn down by September 15th. So we needed to start pumping middle of August to get the lake drawn down by September 15th. But we also didn't want those turtles to go out on the roads when they were finding new overwintering habitat. And so we put fencing up all the way around Normandale Lake to guide them either up the creek or down the creek as they're finding new overwintering habitat. So that's a lot of fence that we had to put up around the lake. But so far it's kept the turtles safe, as far as we know. We've had no reported injuries of turtles. And then a couple other things. We have to release water at a rate that we're not going to cause flooding downstream, but we also have properties upstream that we don't want to lower the water levels at. So no flooding downstream, but there's also properties upstream that we don't want to draw down their water. And so we had to consider that as well. And so we had to put in a temporary weir in the creek above the inlet to Normandale Lake so that we wouldn't draw down the water in the wetlands and properties north of West 84th Street. So those are some of the challenges that we were dealing with before we actually drew down the lake. But then we got to start. So we turned the pumps on August 20th. Things were going really well. September 5th, that's what the lake started to look like. We met our goal of that substantial drawdown by September 15th, and by September 17th, if you were out there, I don't know if anyone actually got to see this, the lake was like bone dry. It looked really good, and we were all really excited. And then I don't know if any of you remember that day. I remember this day really well. It started to rain, and it didn't stop. This was the next day, guys. And then on September 19th, the next day, you can still see that it was a little bit drawn down, but the next day the lake was full. And then we went into flood conditions at the lake, so the lake was out of its banks. So that was a little disappointing. And it just really hasn't stopped raining since then. We've had over 8 inches of precipitation since September 17th, and that's way above normal for this time of year. So again, we totally knew it was going to rain this fall, and we knew we would see water level fluctuations in the lake, but we have had substantially more precipitation than normal this fall. So just because I like science and I like graphs, this is the graph of water elevations in Normandale Lake since we started drawing it down. The black line is the normal lake level in Normandale Lake. The green is our goal. That's where we want water levels to be in the lake. And then the blue line is the tracking of the water levels in the lake. And so you can see where we started over on August 20th and how the water levels dropped, and that, I'll just walk over here. This is where I said, it was just bone dry, that September 17th date where we were really happy. And then it just started to rain, and we've had challenges getting the water levels to drop again. But the really good news is we've been working towards getting this 36-inch pipe installed in the lake, because that's how we want to continue drawing down the lake instead of using those pumps, which is that first picture I showed over on the left. Those are our pumps running, and those pumps actually pump water out of the lake at 4,600 gallons per minute. That's how much water they were pumping out, which is a lot. And at that rate, we were dropping water levels at about 0.3 feet per day. But our real goal was to get this pipe installed, because this is the permanent way that we're going to draw the lake down. And we got half the pipe in on October 4th. And so we have actually switched over to using this pipe to draw down the lake at this point. And with this pipe, we can actually drop the lake at about 0.5 feet per day. And guys, the forecast looks really good. It's not supposed to rain for a while. And so I actually looked, we have a camera mounted up on the towers, and I'll give you that website, so if you want to keep track of the drawdown, you can. We should be able to drop the lake here pretty quickly at this point. And if nothing else, I'm going to have our engineers start working on a giant umbrella for the lake. I think that'll work pretty well. So where we're at is, we're going to continue to monitor water levels at the lake. We want to keep the rate of water going out at that 0.5 feet per day. And we need to install the upstream portion of our 36-inch pipe. But, we're still on track with the project. We're still expecting the lake to be empty for a good winter freeze and to get rid of that curly leaf pondweed. And then, the last step would be to close the pipe at the beginning of March to let the lake refill. So that's where we're at with the drawdown. And then the other two pieces of the project are, I mentioned that there's going to be this pool of water in Normandale that won't go away just because we can't. We can get the lake levels down so far, but then tailwater of the creek actually starts flowing back into the lake. And so we'll have this little pool of water, and so we know we'll need to put a little bit of herbicide into the lake to kill any remaining curly-leaf pondweed. So in the spring of 2019, we'll do a targeted curly-leaf pondweed treatment with a chemical called endothol, which is a selective herbicide, so it goes after that curly-leaf pondweed. And we'll likely have to do this for 2 to 5 years after 2019, just to keep up with any curly-leaf pondweed that's left in the lake. And then the final step of the project is an alum treatment. And this is an important component of the project because alum is a material that when you put it in the lake, it binds with phosphorus. And then what it does is it forms this flock that sinks to the bottom of the lake, and it kind of caps off the sediment, which then prevents release of phosphorus from the bottom sediments as well. And this is gonna hopefully really help deal with the algae problem in the lake. And we will likely have to repeat this in 5 to 10 years in the lake just because we have so much water coming into Normandale. But those are the 3 pieces of the project. And again, our outcomes, we want to reduce the internal phosphorus loading in the lake, so the amount of phosphorus that's being released. We want to improve the native plant community in the lake, and then also hopefully see reduced algae, increase the amount of oxygen in the lake, and reduce those bad odors that people don't like. How are we going to tell if we're successful? We will continue doing water quality monitoring at the lake. And then we'll also look at other ecological health indicators, so the plant community, the fish community at the lake. So I'm a project manager, but I'm also a program manager. I run our education program. So this is the piece where I call on how you can help. I had mentioned at the beginning that we have a grant program. We do give out grants not only to residents, but also to businesses and associations. And they're available to anyone that works or lives in our watershed. And so we have different levels of awards, but these are things you can think about at your business, at your home, if you want to put in a rain garden, green roof, shoreline restoration. So that's your call to action. If you have a place where you can soak in stormwater, think about it, and you can get money from us to help with that project. We've also partnered with the city of Bloomington on a program called Adopt a Drain. And this is where you get out and clean the storm drains in your street. It's an important program because the city of Bloomington does a great job getting out and sweeping our streets, but they can only get out so many times, and we can get out and help them because all the debris that is in those storm drains and on our streets gets down and goes directly to our lakes and creeks and causes pollution. So it's a great community action step that you can take. You can go to that website, claim a storm drain, and then you're responsible for cleaning the excess materials on that drain. And then you get to report back to us how many bags of debris that you clear. And it's so simple that your 6-year-old son can help you do it. And then the other big problem facing 9 Mile Creek is oversalting. These are rocks at 9 Mile Creek in the spring, and that white stuff on them is salt. And it's from all the excess salt that's being put on our sidewalks, parking lots, and streets. And again, the city of Bloomington is a great partner, and they're doing a great job reducing the amount of salt that they're putting down on our streets, but we need everyone's help. So if you own a business, if you're putting salt down at your house, there are steps that you can take to still be safe, but reduce the amount of salt that you're putting down. And so the district hosts workshops on how you can do that. So this is just one of them, but you can go to our website to learn more about that. These are our project websites. For the Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project, the district has one, and the city of Bloomington has one as our project partner. And then again, if you want to watch the drawdown in progress, that NormCam is where you can watch the lake drawdown yourself. It's pretty exciting. And then my contact and Steve's contact as well. And with that, I can take questions.
You talked about the oversalting issue. How does oversalting affect the plant and wildlife?
So the question was, how does oversalting affect plant and wildlife? And that's a great question. So one of the main effects is on fish and the small bugs that live in 9 Mile Creek. So obviously we are a freshwater system. We're the land of 10,000 freshwater lakes, right? And the amount of chloride we're seeing in our lakes and creeks is scary. Sometimes it's spiking up to salt water levels. So it's way too much. And the thing about chloride pollution is that once it gets in our lakes and creeks, it stays there and we have no effective way of removing it. So it just accumulates in our lakes and it doesn't go away. And so we're seeing changes that we can't fix. And so if you think about, our fish that are adapted to fresh water, when our lakes get too salty, they can't tolerate that. So we're going to start seeing changes in fish communities, effects to our macroinvertebrates, which they feed on. So we're going to start seeing changes that we just can't fix if we can't reduce the amount of chloride getting into our water bodies. Oh, that's a lot of hands. We'll start over here.
Where does 9 Mile Creek start?
Where does 9 Mile Creek start? That's a great question. I'm going to go all the way back for a picture. There's 2 branches of 9 Mile Creek. One starts, this isn't the best map. One starts under Excelsior Boulevard and Hopkins, and the other starts out of Minnetonka Lake and Minnetonka, which is that lake up there. I'm a little short. And then they come together right above Normandale Lake. Yeah.
When my wife and I walk around Normandale Lake, and we do that, and notice some of the things, there's megacarp in there. I mean, there's some that are as big as my arm. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing that's non-native species.
Yes.
And will the drawdown affect all those carp? Is there going to be a die-off and all that?
That's a great question. So the question was about seeing carp and the carp in the lake. So we did just complete a fish survey this summer because we were also interested in the question about carp. And what we found was, yes, there's a lot of carp and they're big carp. And so we do need to do carp management, and we're looking at that. So we're likely going to do carp management this spring once water levels come back up. So there's really 2 pieces to that. Will the carp die? We're not sure. If there's a pool of water left in the lake, it's likely they'll be fine because they don't need very much oxygen. We'd be okay if they died, but we don't think they will. So we are going to put radio tags on some of the carp in the spring and see where they're congregating, and then hopefully pull as many of them as we can out. But that's still in the works, so we're still working through those details, working with a consulting company on how to manage those. And then the other piece of it, though, is we will do fish restocking. We're going to work with the Department of Natural Resources to restock some of the good fish in Normandale Lake in the spring. Yeah.
Has there been any thought about digging the lake deeper? I know that for years they said it wasn't deep enough in the first place.
That is a great question. Because of the permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, we're not allowed to dredge Normandale Lake. And so, although it's been brought up a number of times, we are not able to make the lake any deeper.
Where did the non-native invasive species come from, do you think?
So where did the non-native species come from? It's a great question. There's a couple of answers. A lot of invasive species get transported because of us. So we had a boat or a boat trailer or a boat lift in a lake that had invasive species in it, and then we transported them to another lake. So you had a little piece of curly-leaf pondweed caught on the propeller of your boat, and then you brought it to Normandale Lake, and it got dropped into Normandale Lake. There's not a lot of boat traffic on Normandale Lake, so that might not be the answer. We know that it's also upstream in some of our water bodies, and so it could have come in through the creek. So that's a possible answer, and that's why we're also looking at curly-leaf pondweed management in our upstream lakes as well. And so it's probably one of those 2 answers. The carp swim, so they're spawning somewhere probably in one of the upstream wetlands or ponds and then coming into Normandale Lake.
I've known your father for 30 years when he was in Rotary. I'll compliment him on your articulate, very intelligent presentation.
Thank you.
I'm part of a Rotary group that walks around Lake Normandale every Friday morning. And we haven't seen any turtles. Have you found any turtles? We've seen the fence. Toads. Put up. I don't know, and one of the big topics was, I wonder how much that fence cost.
Do you want me to tell you? Is that a data request?
Do you have an idea what the fence cost? First of all, and have you seen any turtles? Second.
We have seen some turtles. We've seen a few snapping turtles, and we've seen some turtles congregating by the inlet of where 9 Mile Creek comes in. So we have seen some turtles. I haven't, you know, I had several long conversations with the Department of Natural Resources, and what they said is that the turtles would use the fence as like a guide. So they would come out of the lake, they would hit the fence, and they would just keep bumping along it until they found the opening, which was going downstream into the creek or upstream. So yes, we've seen turtles. I haven't actually seen any moving along the fence, but when we did our fish survey, we also caught a number of turtles. So caught a handful of snappers and painted turtles. So we know they're in the lake. We don't know how they're using the fence. And in the engineer's estimate, the fence, I think, was estimated to cost about $30,000. I don't remember when we actually got I'm blanking, the numbers from the contractor, what the actual cost was.
There appears to be beavers at the north end. So what about the beavers?
Hey, Steve, what about the beavers?
There's a lodge right there, I'm sure you know this, there's a lodge right by the pedestrian bridge that goes over the inlet channel. And it's a lodge, it's like an overwinter residence, so they don't actually live there year round. When we had the water down before, we gave them a pretty strong message that there wasn't going to be a place for them. Whether they got that message or not, we'll have to reiterate that as we draw the lake back down. And then once we're drawn down there, we're going to go in with our crews and tear out that stuff there and put some rock against the shoreline to kind of make it a little less convenient for them to come and do that.
So where are they coming from?
Up and down the system, river bottoms, you know, and then wherever they find room, they just kind of travel the waterways and come and go.
Thanks, Steve. Where does the water go when you drain it? And as you drain it, does that carry valuable nutrients with it?
So the water we are pumping into the 9 Mile Creek channel. And so I don't know if you heard the other part of the question was, does it carry undesirable nutrients? And one of the biggest things we're worried about is sediment. So suspended sediment being disturbed and sort of pumped into the creek channel. And we're taking a lot of precaution to minimize that. So one of the things we're doing is when we were putting in the pipe, they had to pump some water out of the channel, and there's these special bags that they have to pump that water into and then discharge it before the water can go into the channel. And we also have a whole bunch of silt curtains up in the creek channel as well. And so we have a whole bunch of erosion prevention measures in place so we're not doing just what you're saying, so we're not causing more pollution as we're doing this project. So that's the biggest thing with this project, is causing sediment disturbances in the creek channel. We're also putting, there's riprap being put down as we're putting in these pipes, so as the water exits these pipes into the creek channel, that is able to settle before it's going into the creek channel.
We have time for one more question?
Oh, yes.
I think people would be interested to know that Normandale Lake was actually a placemaking project at the time, but the Corps of Engineers was only approving certain uses, so it was presented as a flood control project. But Martin Kapp owned the land where the Normandale Lake Office Park is, that was undeveloped at the time, and Tony Bernardi owned a lot of the residential land south of the lake that was developed later. And they conspired with the city to say, wouldn't it be nice to have a lake, something like Lake Harriet, that you would have paths around and people could walk around. And by the way, that would really assist the development of our property in the long run. It was a very successful placemaking project, but you don't see that in the documentation because the Corps of Engineers would have turned down the project if it was presented as placemaking.
That's some good history. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.